Hello and welcome to For the Love of CG. I'm your host, Sam Klein, and I would like to thank you for allowing me into your home, your office, or your classroom, or wherever you happen to be watching this from today. This will be the first episode of this program. I am hoping to make a sort of Bob Ross style internet show about 3D modeling and computer graphics. Something that I am personally very passionate about, something that I love, and I want to be able to share the love with you. So we will bounce back and forth between Maya, Blender, and Substance Painter throughout this series. Today we'll be working mostly in Maya. Since this will be our first model together, we will actually be doing something very, very simple. We will be doing a coffee cup. Give me 1 second here to look up a picture of a coffee cup. Now, here's something to know in computer graphics, is that it is okay to look up references. It is okay to find something that already looks like the thing you're trying to make and work from that. Yes, Martin, I hear you. I've got a kitty cat. His name is Martin. I love him very, very much, and he is very talkative today. So here, coffee cup. All right, so I will share my screen with you here in just a moment. All right. So now I shall share my screen. There we go. There we go. As you can see, I have a coffee cup up on the screen right now. It's not too complicated. There's several more down here. You could download the picture if you wanted, if you were really struggling to imagine a coffee cup in your mind. Now, for more complicated things, you definitely will want to download your pictures and save them in a file. What we're going to do today, however, is we're going to let's go off this image on the screen, because I think that since most of us have seen a coffee cup or a teacup, depending on which part of the world you're from, that we pretty much know what we're looking for. We will know when it looks right. So if you'll give me a moment here. Now, one thing that's always good to have with you is portable storage. This way you can take your files with you. If you work at a company where you do computer graphics, if you're going to school for computer graphics, you'll probably have your computer at home and your computer at work. And this will be very, very handy for transferring your files between those two computers. Also, depending on the size of your project, it might take up a lot of storage. You don't necessarily want that clogging up your computer's hard drive. So I will plug in my thumb drive here. Move my actual coffee cup on my desk. And that's another thing, is it is okay to have actual references. If you can actually get a hold of the physical item you're trying to model, that's even better. All right. So let's see here. I've got a ruler here somewhere. Here we go. I bought this at Winco a little while ago. This is called the Survival Comb. I actually do use it for combing my beautiful hair, but it's also got a little ruler on the side. Now, a tape measure or a larger ruler would work better, but this is what I have with me right now. So, judging from this, I estimate this coffee cup's about 3.5 inches tall and about 3.5 inches wide. It's almost a perfect square. And you know what? That is something we can work with. So what I'll do here is I'll share my screen again. Share, not now AVG. And we will go into Maya. Today we'll be working in Maya because that's the industry standard. If you have a college email address, or a high school email address, something that ends in edu, you can apply for a free student's license to Maya. Now just make sure to keep in mind that whatever you make with a student's license in Maya, you're not technically legally allowed to sell in the marketplace. Blender is another free software, and I will actually be making the coffee cup in Blender next episode. That way, the Blender folks can also see how to do this. And because Blender is completely free, you actually can sell whatever you make with it. Now, do you want to sell your coffee cup? That's up to you. But we are in Maya now. And so what we want to do is we want to set Maya to work. First thing we want to do is we want to set Maya to be working in our desired units. Now, I'm American. I measure most things in inches. Unless they're larger, then I'll measure them in feet. But this coffee cup, we're measuring it in inches. So what I am going to do is I'm going to set the working units in Maya to be inches. Now, that's actually very, very easy. What we want to do is we go to Windows up here at the top, and we find Settings, Preferences, Preferences. And then we go down here to where it says Settings, right here about halfway, about 3/4 of the way up from the bottom of the list, or it's right there, right above where it says Animation. Now, right here is where we change things. By default, it's in centimeters. So the real world size of most of your starting items in Maya, if you don't set everything, is going to be pretty darn tiny. It's going to be in centimeters. So I'm working in inches. I will set it to inch and I will click save. And you'll notice the grid has gotten a lot closer because it's blown up the size of the grid. The next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to set a project file. This is the next thing you want to do before you do anything in Maya. Now, how do we do that? We'll go up to File here, and we go Project Window, and that'll bring up the project window. Let's see here. So right now it says Current Project Default. There is a default folder. We don't necessarily want to do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to go New Project, and you can call this whatever you want. But to keep things simple, I'm going to go Sam _ coffee cup. Where am I going to put this? Well, let's put this on my thumb drive. That'll be my, well, it's going to say, no, my Toshiba is my external drive, my Lexar. Here we go. It's going to be drive D for me. It might be whatever drive you work with. And let's go my projects. And yes, select. So now it's going to create this folder. It's going to create all these subfolders here. Now these are where Maya is going to look for all sorts of different things. This is where it's going to look for the assets relating to this project that we're doing. Once you start accumulating assets, we don't have any yet, but we will soon. And we are going to click Accept. All right. Now nothing's changed, but it has changed. What it's done is now Maya is now looking in those folders for anything that we're doing. So let's do something so that Maya has something to save. What you want to do when you're 3D modeling is you want to look for something that is closest to the real world shape of what you're working with. If you're making like a milk crate, which will make a milk crate later on, you'd probably want to start with a box. If you're going to make a coffee cup, you want to start with a cylinder, because if you haven't noticed, except for the handle here, it's pretty darn cylindrical. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to, now there's two ways you can do it. You can either, if you look up at the top here, you've got all these different tabs. If you go to poly modeling, you'll have a cylinder right there, as long as some of the more common shapes that you'll be working with. But there's actually more shapes than just that. If you go up to, where is it? Create. You want polygon primitives. And this brings you a whole drop-down menu. Other things you can do. Now you might think that a pipe would be appropriate, but it's not, because if you'll notice, the coffee cup here has a solid bottom. So That's not what we want because a pipe has a hole all the way through it. We want something that's got a solid bottom. So we're going to do the cylinder. Look at that. We've got ourselves a pretty nifty little cylinder. Now, one thing I should say is the controls of Maya. I should mention these. Scroll wheel zooms in and out. Now, if I hold down Alt and scroll, I can move around. If you hold down Alt, okay, yep, this is it. So Alt and left click, or your primary mouse button, will rotate the view. They'll actually orbit the view around the center of the grid. Alt middle mouse button is pan. This allows you to pan around the scene. And then Alt right click allows you to do a smooth zoom. Or you can just use the mouse wheel. You kind of get kind of a chunky zoom where it's, you skip ahead a certain amount, but you don't always want to do that. So sometimes if you want a more smoother zoom, Alt and right click. There's also a context menu here that you'll be using a lot, right here. This will allow you to enter your different edit modes. We'll look at that later. For now, what we want to do is we want to edit some of the attributes of the cylinder, because the cylinder is here. It's loaded into the scene. And you can see it over here under the hierarchy. It's called P cylinder 1. One thing we should do before we start editing the actual physical cylinder is edit its name in the hierarchy. If you're working in a video game or animation pipeline, it is good to label everything in your scene appropriately. So how would we do that? Well, we double click it here, then we should name it coffee cup underscore geo. Now you can name it whatever you want. However, the common industry standard is to name what it is underscore then geo. Geo stands for geometry. So you might have some other stuff relating to the coffee cup. You might have a coffee cup layer because you can have layers in Maya. And so you would put coffee cup underscore LYR for layer. That way, if you're working on a team, right? You hand your file off to somebody else so they can do work on it. They'll know, okay, everything pertaining to the coffee cup is under the coffee cup layer. But let's say they don't want to edit everything. They just want the coffee cup's geometry. Then you have coffee cup underscore geo. And that makes it easier to find it if you've got a larger scene. If you just want to look at all the geometries specifically, this will allow you to search by GEO, which will pull up all the geometries. So now that we named it coffee cup underscore geo, we are going to hit enter. And there we go. Got properly named file. So what are we going to do here now? If you look, there's some really tiny tabs over on the side here. You got your channel layer box editor, you got your modeling toolkit, attribute editor. I have render settings here. They're not always here. You can put them here if you want. I've also put my tool settings over here, but these top three here will be the most common. So what you want to do is you want to go to your channel box layer editor, and you want to go to your inputs. And right now it has the radius at 2 inches. It's got the radius at 1 inch and the height at 2 inches. So we want to make this a square. We're going to go with that. And if we look around this thing, we see that it is fairly squarish. Okay, so subdivisions axis. Now this is, if you notice, it's kind of divided into a pie. And that's what all these pie pieces are. These are the subdivisions axis. We don't need 20 subdivisions. That's a little much. So when you're 3D modeling, you want to start out in as few subdivisions as possible, all right? Because you want to start simple as possible, and then as you work, you will build up and build up more geometries. And you don't ever want to build up too many geometries. especially if you're working for a video game pipeline, because having to load in all the physics and all the textures and all the control algorithms, and then having to load in high geometry shapes is going to cause your game to bog down. Now, for movies, if you're working with movies like, let's say, Pixar or DreamWorks or any of those guys, then having high poly objects is okay because they've got, quite frankly, their rendering computers are actually more powerful than the ones they use for video games usually. But that's the other thing is the video game, once it's loaded on your computer becomes its own little rendering server. So you have to take into account that every player has to render their own video game. You know, the movie only gets rendered once and then loaded onto film and then shot up onto a projection screen in the theater or broadcast over television. And there's a truck outside, but we are going to ignore that and continue on. So subdivision axis. What I'm going to do, and you can have as many or as few as you want, but I highly recommend you do 14 because if you notice here, now we have a side, we have actually two sides that are flat to the axis. Got this side and this side, and that's going to help us out later. So 14 divisions there. Now subdivision caps. The tops and the bottoms of the cylinder are the caps, and right now they have one circular subdivision. Yes, it's divided into 14 triangles, but we actually want to make this two. So now we've actually got a ring to work with. And this ring is going to be very important. So now let's see, we're working in inches. So 1 unit here is going to be 1 inch. So now we get to set this to the side. You can change the size here, but I would recommend that actually changing the size here is something that you do, actually scaling is something that you do up here. These inputs are slightly different than these inputs. These inputs are more permanent to the actual geometry. These ones are more elastic, and these ones can be changed and edited at will. So just so we don't confuse, now that we're done changing these ones, there was a way to hide them. We are not going to worry about that. Okay, so scale. This is where we change our inputs. So what did we say? We said 3.5. Now the up in Maya is Y. In some programs it's Z up. In Maya it is Y up. Now Blender is Z up, but if you look down here in the corner of the viewport here, you're going to see that Y, or the green one, is the one that's pointing straight up. So we have Y up. So our scale Y, and you can actually hold, if you click and drag on this, you're going to see it's going to stretch in the vertical, right? That's what that is all about. So we determine that's basically a square. So what we can do is if we highlight all of these, we can change these all at once. We say 3.5. Whoa. Oh, there we go. Look at that. Something seems a little off though. I'm gonna hit Control X. And see, here's the thing. Okay, radius. Radius isn't quite right. If we go 0.25, no, 0.5. Oops. There we go. That is more what we want. So now we're going to go scale 3.5. There we go. That is more reasonable. And see, here's the thing is that it's okay to, you know, go back and change your mind on these things. It's okay to mess up a little bit because you can always, always, always go back and change things. That's part of learning. That's part of the fun of this is finding out what doesn't work and then finding out what does work. So what we are going to do now is we're going to create the dip in the coffee cup. We're going to create the actual bowl. To do that, we're going to hold down right click and you're going to see we've got a wheel menu now. If you're a video gamer, you may think of Grand Theft Auto immediately or Red Dead Redemptions when you pull up your weapon wheel. Well, S is very similar. We've got a lot of stuff down here, but we're not going to worry about this drop-down menu. We're going to worry about this wheel. And what we want to select is edge. So all the lines in this are edges. Now you might think, oh, that these are the only edges because this is on the actual edge. But technically, this is an edge too, even though it's in the middle of the geometry, it's technically still an edge because it is the edge of these faces. See, there are three things that make up the geometry here. There's three things that make up the model. You get your vertexes. Well, actually, they're called, one is called a vertex, multiple is called vertices, right? And these are the actual points. Here, these are just singular points in space. You can select more than one at once and manipulate them how you want. Then you have edges, which are these lines. All these lines are considered edges. Even though they're not technically on the edge of the model, it's on the edge of the face. What are the faces? The faces are these squares now, or these triangles right here. These are technically faces. But if you'll notice, these are the faces. And the edges aren't necessarily, like I said, they're not necessarily the edges of the model, they're the edges of the face. So what we want to do right now is, look at that, I've already selected it, but let's click off. And what you can do is you double click a single edge that's connected to a bunch of other edges, it'll select the whole thing, and that's what we want. Or let's say you only want to select a range of edges. Let's say the only edges I want to affect are this one, this one, this one, this one, and this one. I can go like that, and now those are the ones that are selected. And I can manipulate them however I want. But for what we're doing right now, we want these selected. What we're going to do is we are going to hit R on the keyboard. R brings up our scale tool, E brings up our rotate tool, and Y brings up our move tool. Right now, what we want to do is bring up our scale tool. This gives you three different directions to where you can manually scale things by clicking and dragging all of these. If you click and drag the center one, it does an all-around scale. If you do this one, now this one isn't going to do much because this is technically flat. But if I were to, say, just scale on here, now I've done oval in the middle of my cup, and it'd be the same thing along here. You can also scale in two directions at once. If you look here, there's these little flat squares floating in the middle of nothing here. These allow you to scale two directions at once. And even though I could, for this particular instance, I could use a center square here, it's going to try and scale it up, even though it's not going to. I personally don't feel comfortable with it trying to scale up because sometimes Maya has a mind of its own. And you have to take that into account when you're doing stuff. So now we have that scale to about the size of a coffee cup ring. In fact, we could probably scale it just a little bit more. There we go. I'd say that's about good. So great. We've got a kind of a coffee cup shaped thing so far. But you know what? We are missing the bowl. We are missing the place where the liquid would be held. Well, how do we get that? Well, if you, now one thing you can't do is, well, technically you can do the same thing where you can select all the faces at once. Whoops. You can select all the faces at once. You can't do that if they all end in a central point like this. Now I can do these. Hold on a second. If I go like this, whoops. Go Q. There we go. And I can select this ring, but I can't select all of these, which is a bit of a shame, but it is just the way it works. So what I want to do is I want to bring up my modeling toolkit. And here's a tool that is going to frustrate you if you don't know it exists, because it's off by default. It's called camera-based selection. So one thing, like in most programs like Photoshop or whatever, you can click and drag to select multiple objects. So here we go. I've got this pie selected now, but if I try to do something, it's going to affect the other side of the thing, because watch this. Watch what happens when I rotate around. All of a sudden, these are selected. I don't want these selected. So, okay. What the heck? Now these are selected. I'll tell you what, it's called camera-based selection. And right now it's turned off. So what it's doing right now is it's selecting everything that's inside this thing, including the stuff you don't see, the stuff on the back side of the model, right? So is literally selecting everything that exists within that box, including these two faces right here, but I don't want those selected. So if you turn on camera-based selection, what it does is it only selects the things you can see. So right now, if I drag over the whole model and then rotate around, you would see that these are still unselected because I couldn't see them before. So that's what we want to do, is we want to turn camera-based selection on for you. Now there are going to be times when you want to turn it off. Like let's say you want to create symmetry. Like if you're making a window, you've got a wall and you want to make a window and you want to select both sides of the wall, then you want to turn camera-based selection off. But here, for what we're doing, for our purposes, we're going to turn camera-based selection on because we only want this pie to be selected. Now, instinctually, you might think, okay, I just have to sink it down, right? Hit W and then drag it down. But you got to notice it's not quite doing anything. All of a sudden, our rim is gone. That's not quite right, is it? Well, it's because it's not right. We have to do what's called an extrusion. That's where we create new geometry. I'll show you. So what you want to do now is you want to hit Shift. Now that you've got these selected, you want to hit Shift E. And now, oops, that's not doing it. Oops. Control E, that's it, Control E. You hit Control E, and you can sink it down in. Now you might be wondering, okay, how far am I going? How do I know I'm not going to hit the bottom? Well, there's a handy little tool up here called X-ray mode, if I can find it. Right there, X-ray mode. And this allows you to see inside your model. And for doing a model that has an internal bit like this is very, very handy. So if we extrude down, you can actually extrude up too. If I go like this, well, now I've kind of created a battery, create like the nipples on a battery like that, or anything else. We're actually going to be using that part of it to create the handle later on. But right now we want to extrude down into the model to create the place where our coffee or our tea is going to sit. Now is a good time to talk to you about orthographic view. Orthographic view is, so I'll show you how to get there first, and then I'll explain it. So if you hold your cursor out in the middle of nothing, you just tap your space bar. Now your screen is in 4 different things. You might be freaking out a bit right now, but it's okay. What you want to do is you want to select the screen, one of these side views here. So select one of these viewports or screens, hit spacebar again, and that makes that your main viewer. Orthographic view is a perspectiveless view that allows you to see exactly where things are flat. So the camera in this view has been set to a focal length of infinity, and that allows us to measure things up nice and neat along a grid. So everything on this thing is measured perfectly. But since we're technically in a different viewport, we have to turn on X-ray again. I don't know how thick the bottom of a coffee cup is, but I'm going to call that good. Now you can make the bottom of your coffee cup as thick as you'd like or as thin as you'd like, but this is how I'm going to do it. Okay. Now orthographic view, like I said, is very useful for if you want to get exact measurements when you're modeling something. So right now, since my working units is set to inches, each one of these squares on this grid back here is 1 inch. And that allows me to take measurements of an object as I work on it. It's also very useful for when you're doing animation, which we will do some animation later on, because you can animate from grid point to grid point to grid point. And that will help kind of keep you on track a little bit, kind of have some metric of where you are in the scene. So let's go back to our 3D view. There we go. So now we're done with it. All right, we got ourselves something that's shaping up to be a coffee cup. Let's turn off the X-ray for now. And it kind of looks like a coffee cup. It has no handle. That's what we're about to do. So how do I make a handle? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to go over here and bring up our multi-cut tool, the modeling toolkit. First, okay, so you know how I showed you earlier, this weapon wheel here will allow you to select edges, faces, and vertices. Well, you can also do that over here at the top of your modeling toolkit. This will do the exact same thing. So the nice thing about mine is there's always multiple ways to do everything. Okay, there's so many redundant ways because each and every person is going to develop their own workflow. And that is fine. That is fantastic. And we are going to, I'm just showing you my workflow. You can develop your own. You can copy mine if you want. I just hope you develop one that works for you. So right now we want to make sure our edges are selected since we're going to actually be making new edges. And this is the multi-cut tool. This is the computer graphics equivalent of a real knife. And like a real knife, you have to be very, very careful of it because you can very easily ruin your model if you don't know what you're doing with this thing. So if you have to rotate your model around, let's say like this. Now I'm doing it with the knife tool out. This is very dangerous because I could start making cuts on my model that I don't want to make. So what's the safest thing to do is if you have to do anything on, only bring out the cutting tool for cutting. If you have to rotate around, push Q, and it'll go back to the standard pointer. Now you can't harm your model at all. Well, you can, but it's a lot harder. So anyways, multi-cut tool. What we want to do is create some edge loop cuts. See that how it creates a ring around it? This is what we actually want to do. We do this by holding down Control, and then we're not dragging, we're just moving the mouse up and down. This allows us to set where our cuts will be. So right now, I'm going to go right here, and I'm going to go right here, and I'm going to make 2 more down here. I'm going to go right here, and I'm going to go right here. Make sure you're holding down Control as you click, because otherwise you'll create a single vertice on that thing and it's going to mess it up. Oops, see that? I was being stupid. I damn near messed up my model. There we go. Now we are primed and ready to start creating the handle. So we got to pick a side. We have to make a decision, pick which side we're going to put it on. Now, remember how I said we want 14 faces on this cylinder so that we have two sides that are flat to the axes. This is why I did it, because now I'm going to do this over here so it's easier for you to see. Now we have these two sides that are flat to the axes. And it's going to make it a lot easier to extrude out and create our handles. Yes, I said extrude again. This is where we actually create our handles. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit Control E. We're going to drag this out. And we're going to drag it up a little bit. And you're going to say, oh, this face is, we need to make it curve up more. Well, this is where we hit E, which brings up a rotate tool. And there we go. We got this rotated. And if I hit Control E again, I just extrude it again. It's going to extrude straight out. And we're going to do this several times, adjusting it a little bit each time to create our curve. So I'm going to move back and forth between the move tool and the rotate tool till we get it where we want. Now you can shape your handle however you want. You can make it just very small and basic. You can make it very large. You can play with it however you want. You've got a lot of freedom here. I'm going to make the handle that I think my cup should have. That's the thing. With modeling, you can make whatever kind of handle your cup should have. As Bob Ross always used to say, this is your world, you are the creator. So I'm going to start on the top half of my handle. I want my handle to curve up a little bit like it does on some coffee cups. So take that, I'm going to move that up a little bit. I'm going to rotate that like that. And now you might think this is tedious, and it is a little tedious. It is, but you know what? It's also very therapeutic. Now let's see here. Move this back a little bit, rotate this a little bit. Let's go extrude again. I'm not going to extrude out as far for this one because this is where I want to really start to curve. So turn like that, extrude out, move it down. And let's rotate it a little bit more so it's pointing more towards this face. Eventually, we're going to bridge between these two faces. And let's see here. Let's extrude again. And we are going to rotate again. Let's move it down more. There we go. In fact, let's move it back a little bit. There we go. And so far, so good. We've got ourselves a decent cup, and our handle is well underway. But now we need to bridge these handles, because this is going to be a nightmare. It's going to break off easily. And who's ever drinking from this cup isn't going to have a good time. So what we need to do now is we need to do something very bold. We need to delete the face. And you do that by just selecting your face and hitting delete. Now it looks like there's some invisible stuff here. I've got my reverse normals turned off so I don't see them, but under your program, you'll probably see black squares on the inside here. Look at that. Same thing. So we have these faces deleted now. We've got just empty holes here. This is where we want to bridge things. So we want to go select our edges, double click that one, then hold down Shift and double click that one. So that way both sets of edges are selected. And now we're going to go up to Edit Mesh. Somewhere up here is a bridge tool. Bridge, there we go. And look at that. Now it is one whole thing. Ain't that something? There we go. Our handle is complete. And you might be thinking to yourself, wow, I just made a coffee cup. Everything is complete. Let's exit edit mode. Let's go into object mode. This is where you go to your weapon wheel again. You go object mode. You can also click the orange box here. And I want you to do real quick is to push the number 3 on your number pad if you have a number pad. And it looks all right. It looks a little squidgy, but what is that? It's not quite right. All your beautiful hard edges. Now you don't want too many hard edges, but you want some. They've gone all kind of squidgy. Well, this is where we shore up our edges. Say we want these edges to be just a little bit more defined. Now, I don't want them to be too hard. We don't want the drinker to cut his lip on the edge of this thing, but we don't want them to be, you know, completely like a melted jelly. What we have to do is we have to shore up our edges. And this is where we create edge loop cuts. Pull out our multi-cut tool again. And we make more rings closer to the edges here. So when you do this, it's not actually smooth yet. It's just showing you a preview of what it'll look like when you apply the smoothing tool, right? And the way these smoothing algorithms work is it calculates. I'm going to put the knife away before I cut something. Let's go here. It calculates the average between 3 edges for every face, and then it smooths them out based on that. So when it calculates the average angle between these 3 edges, this is what it gets. Same thing for this. So because we only have 4, because this handle only has 4 edges on either side of it, it makes it almost perfectly round because that is the average between these edges. So what we want to do is if we want to make it more defined. Now you don't have to do this. If you like it all squidgy and melty, you can do that. But there are sometimes, especially if you create like a box, like for when we do the milk crate in a later episode, we want that to stay as perfectly square as possible. So we are definitely going to want to shore up our edges then. But I'm going to do this for my cup now. You don't have to do this. Like I said, it's your cup. It's your world. You are the creator, but this is what I am doing. So, and you can always check back. See, now that's a pretty nice edge there. If you wanted to, you could put one up here. Add a little. Well, I'm going to leave that. I like the way that looks when it does that. So let's go down to the bottom here. And it's almost a little too round, almost like it'll fall over. So I'm going to put an edge loop right down there. Those are my birds. I do have pet birds. Hey, look at that. That looks really nice. And so this edge here, I want to shore up this edge. So look at that. And let's do it on both sides here. Oh, that is turning out to be beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. If you want to see the in-between of what's going on, you hit the number 2 on your numpad. And if you're going to be modeling, you don't necessarily need a computer with a numpad. I know that for a lot of gamers these days, having a computer keyboard that is just the main keyboard is what's popular. A lot of them buy these mini keyboards without a numpad. But if you're going to be modeling, I would highly suggest that you get a keyboard with a numpad because there are a lot of hotkeys that are bound to this number pad in a lot of different programs. Not only just Maya, but you got Blender, you got ZBrush, you've got a Substance Painter. A lot of hotkeys are bound to this number pad, and is gonna speed up your workflow tremendously if you decide to get a keyboard that has a number pad. So I would suggest you do that. So let's go here, and you know what? The only other one I might do is this one in here to make this have more of a solid bottom. There. I'm gonna push Q and put my knife away so I don't ruin anything. Look at that. We've got ourselves a really nice coffee cup. Just go into object mode. In object mode, you can't change the geometry at all. You can just manipulate the object as it is. So what I'm going to do, now here's something that you should get into the habit of if you're going to be using Maya a lot. And especially if you, once we get more advanced, we create bigger scenes. What we want to do is we want to delete the history for this coffee cup so far. And what is the history? The history is the undo history. And by default, you can set it to where you can set Maya to have a set number of undos. So you can set it to where you can only have 50 undos. So it means you can only undo 50 changes. By default, Maya is set to unlimited undos, which I'm just going to leave that as it is. I would recommend you leave it that way. If you want, you can change it, but I would recommend that you just leave it at unlimited. But if you have too many undos in your history, Maya is going to start to get buggy. Now, for a simple object like this, it's not that bad. We don't necessarily need to do this, but it's good to start getting in the habit of it. So what we want to do is, and this will prevent crashes because as it saves these undos, it's just one more thing for Maya to try and remember. And like I said, if you get more complex scenes, you know, Maya might decide to crash out because Maya has a mind of her own, like I mentioned. And sometimes you have to tell her that it's okay to forget a few things because otherwise she'll melt down. So let's go delete by type, or you can go delete all by type. We're going to go delete by type history. Now, before I click this, I just want you to be sure of one thing, and that is this will make it so you can't undo anymore. From this point forward, this cup will be stuck like this. All right. I won't be able to undo any of the changes I've made so far. So only do the, you should delete by type history periodically, but only after you've reached a point to where you are confident that that's where you want to be at. And right now I've reached that point, so I'm going to click this button. And that is going to save me a lot of headache down the road. And there we are. So what I should do now before, just in case you do want to save off. So we're going to go save scene as, we go coffee cup underscore 001. That is the file name convention I'm going for. I'm not going to worry about texture unwrapping just yet. We're not going to worry about any of that stuff. But what we are going to do is we are going to smooth out our model. So how can we do that? Well, I think this button here, that's combine, smooth. Okay, so this button here will smooth out our model. And now it looks just like that preview we had before. You can smooth it out a heck of a lot more by this little pop-up interface here and add way more divisions. But I'm not going to do that right now because the more divisions you add, the laggier Maya will get because it's got more to process. But one set of divisions is perfect. Now, actually, I am going to hit undo. I'm going to hit undo for just 1 minute. I'm going to show you how to make this a game-ready model. So, let's say I want to use my coffee cup in a video game. What I want to do is I want to export a low poly version of it. So, what I have to do is I have to make sure my cup is selected. And then I go export selection. And by default, it's not going to be in FBX, but you want to go to your type of files here. And where is it? I just had FBX export. FBX stands for Film Box. It's an older program. It's not used as much anymore. However, its file extension still is. This is exporting the actual model. There's different model file formats. There's .obj. I know there's a few, but .obj is probably the most common. .fbx is the industry standard. You can do a lot with this. So let's go coffee cup low. And we're going to hit enter, right? So what we should do now is we should duplicate this coffee cup. So if we hit Control D, we now have our coffee cup duplicated. See that? Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this coffee cup low geo. And I'm going to call this coffee cup high geo. Now it's called a coffee cup geo 1 because it's just duplicated exactly what I had. So now this high geo is what's going to get saved with a high poly count. So we're going to hide this, and we are going to smooth this, and we are going to go delete by type history. So that way, as far as Maya is concerned, it has always looked like this. We're going to select it, and to hide something on your screen, you select the item and you hit H. So now I can't select it. I have to go back to bring it back. I go in my hierarchy. I selected my hierarchy, and I hit H again to bring it back. See? Very, very simple. So now I just want to make sure that the only thing selected is my high poly cup. And I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to go to export selection, coffee cup high. Now, what you're going to do with this later on, we'll show you how to do textures later on. But what this will do for us is this will allow us to kind of cheat. We're going to cheat video game renderers. All right, and this is what the experts actually do. This is what they do in pretty much every video game you've played, right? So right now you can kind of see how the light is hitting this cup. It looks pretty darn smooth. You can see a little bit of jagged, but it's fine. The way the light is hitting this cup, that's called a normal map, right? And that's just a calculation of how the light bounces off each and every polygon on this cup. It's going to edge, it's going to face mode. And so that's what the normal map does, is it just tells the computer how the light will bounce off each and every face here. But what you can do to save processing power in a video game is if you can steal the normal map from this higher poly cup and wrap it around this lower poly cup, and it will trick the computer into rendering this higher poly, it'll trick the computer into rendering this low poly cup as if it has more polygons. And in a video game environment where everything's fast and not necessarily being looked at in high detail, right? If you've got a coffee cup in the scene, you might only have it for a few seconds before it either gets smashed or explosion happens or something else happens. And so The only way you're going to notice that's a low poly cup is if you look really closely at it, which in most games you're not going to have time to do. So basically, you're giving birth to twins. You're ripping the skin off the prettier twin and wrapping it around the uglier twin. It's a little bit of a morbid metaphor, but it works for what I'm talking about here. And hopefully, unless people look closely, they won't notice. And if they do notice, they can write an article about it on the internet and make some money off of a clickbait article. So you're supporting, video game magazines. So now that we've made some changes, what we want to do is we want to save again. So I'm going to save scene as coffee cup _ 0002. And you might be asking, how often should I save when I'm working in Maya or Blender or working in something like this? The standard procedure is save about every 15 minutes. Keep it tight. If you have to keep a timer, keep a timer on you with a 15-minute timer on it. And every time it goes off, just make sure you hit that save and increment your save. That way, let's say something goes drastically wrong in this scene, I can go back to an earlier version and at least get some of my work back, right? Because what would you rather lose? Would you rather lose 15 minutes of work, or would you rather lose 2 hours of work? Sometimes it's unavoidable. Sometimes you have to go back, and there's no shame in that. All right. But it's better to, like I said, it's better to go back 15 minutes than it is to go back 2 hours. All right. You don't want to hear the cries of despair when somebody loses 2 hours of work. That is a heartbreaking experience. It's even more heartbreaking when it happens to you, but if it's happened to one of your friends, you feel for them. All right. So that about wraps it up for today. We've made ourselves not one, but 2 decent coffee cups. And I think we did a good job. So that's it for now. Once again, thank you for inviting me into your home, your office, or your classroom. And I'll see you next time. Take care. Be safe.